I never thought a single day could quietly rewrite the entire meaning of my life. But that is exactly what happened when my wife chose to celebrate her birthday anywhere except with me. In our home, birthdays had always been sacred, a time when we paused the chaos of bills, work, and exhaustion just to remind each other that love was supposed to be the center of everything. Yet that morning, instead of waking to laughter or warmth, I stood alone in our kitchen staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My name is Nalin Mercer, and at the time I was in my mid-40s, running a small roadside assistance and vehicle recovery company in a town that barely noticed when people like me struggled or succeeded. My days were filled with broken-down engines, stranded drivers, and long nights on highways that seemed to stretch forever, but I believed I was building something meaningful for my family. That belief shattered when my wife sent me a message explaining she had decided to spend her birthday evening with a colleague instead of her husband and child. The words were polite, almost professional, as if she were canceling a meeting rather than dismissing the people who loved her most. I convinced myself it was stress, deadlines, or exhaustion, because accepting the truth felt far more terrifying. Our daughter, barely 9 years old, had spent the previous night making a card covered in crooked hearts and glitter glue, whispering excitedly about how she wanted her mother to feel special. Watching her hope glow so brightly made the silence in the house that morning feel unbearable, and yet I forced myself to smile and pretend nothing was wrong, unaware that I was standing at the edge of a truth that would soon pull me under. By midday, my phone vibrated again while I was towing a stalled sedan off a gravel shoulder, and the message confirmed what my instincts had already been screaming. My wife was not just going to dinner. She was going with a man she claimed was just a friend from work. The words hit harder than any physical blow because they carried the unmistakable weight of familiarity, of something rehearsed. I tried to rationalize it, reminding myself that trust meant believing even when doubt whispered otherwise. But when I mentioned our daughter's school performance that night, her response was sharp and dismissive. She told me I could handle it alone, that our child would understand, as though the small moments that shape a life were disposable. Standing beside my truck, grease on my hands and rain in the air, I felt a cold realization settle in. The woman I married would never have chosen a stranger over her child's first solo performance. That was when the ground beneath me began to shift. I finished my work mechanically, answering calls and pulling vehicles from ditches, but my mind replayed her words again and again. When I arrived home, my daughter asked if her mother would be there to watch her sing, and the hope in her eyes nearly broke me. I lied gently, promising she was just busy, while silently knowing something far darker was unfolding beyond my control. That evening, as I braided my daughter's hair with clumsy hands and drove her to the school cafeteria lit by flickering fluorescent lights, I felt like I was watching our family from the outside. Parents filled the crooked rows of chairs, holding phones and coffee cups, whispering about ordinary things, unaware that my world was unraveling. When my daughter stood on stage and searched the room, her eyes landed on me, then drifted toward the empty seat beside me where her mother should have been. The moment passed quickly, but it carved itself into my memory forever. Afterward, her teacher casually asked about my wife's absence, and I offered another weak excuse that convinced no one, including myself. On the drive home, my daughter fell asleep in the back seat, still wearing her costume, and as I carried her to bed, she murmured something that sent a chill through my entire body. She mentioned a man she called Uncle, who bought her ice cream when her mother picked her up from school. The words echoed in the silence long after she drifted back to sleep, leaving me standing in the doorway with 1,000 unanswered questions, and a growing certainty that the truth was far worse than I feared. That night I barely slept, listening for footsteps, checking windows, waiting for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. When my wife finally returned in the early hours, she moved quietly, as if afraid to wake the house, and her guilt seemed to linger in the air like smoke. By morning, I made a decision that would have once felt unthinkable. I followed her. After dropping our daughter at school, I parked across from the office building where my wife worked, pretending I was just another car on a busy street. Hours later, she emerged with a man whose presence made my stomach tighten instantly. The way he placed his hand against her back, the way she leaned into him, told a story no words could disguise. I trailed them to a restaurant where they ordered wine in the middle of the day, laughing and touching as though they were the only two people in the world. Every rule my wife claimed to live by dissolved before my eyes. I took photos with shaking hands, not knowing what I would do with them, only that I needed proof I was not imagining this betrayal. When they finally parted and returned to their separate lives, I drove away feeling hollow, yet strangely focused, as though clarity had replaced confusion at last. That evening, while my wife showered, I searched her belongings and uncovered evidence that felt like knives against my skin. Receipts for lingerie she never wore for me anymore, and a hotel key hidden where she thought I would never look. Each discovery tightened the knot in my chest, confirming that this was not a misunderstanding but a carefully maintained double life. I confronted her gently, masking my anger behind casual questions, and watched her lie without hesitation. The ease with which she rewrote reality frightened me more than the affair itself. Later that night, I called an old friend who worked as a private investigator, a man who had once helped me resolve business disputes. Speaking the words out loud felt surreal, yet once spoken, they could not be taken back. He warned me that the truth would hurt, that knowledge could not be undone, but I told him I needed to know everything. As my wife slept beside me, her breathing steady and calm, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long she had been living this lie while pretending to love me. Days passed like shadows, each moment heavy with anticipation. When my friend finally called, his voice was grave, and he asked to meet me in person. We sat in a dim bar filled with strangers who would never know the story unfolding between us. He spread photographs across the table, showing my wife and the man together in parks, hotels, restaurants, laughing and holding hands as though they belonged to one another. The affair had been going on for months, long enough to develop routines, long enough to involve my daughter in ways that made my stomach churn. He explained that they had used her as a cover, presenting themselves as a family in public spaces while I worked late nights to provide for us. The man even introduced my wife as his girlfriend, not his secret. Each detail felt like another blow, yet beneath the pain, a strange sense of resolve began to grow. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about protecting my child and reclaiming my life. Armed with the truth, I began to plan, not out of revenge but out of necessity. I pretended everything was normal while quietly contacting a lawyer and arranging my next steps. When I spoke to the man involved, inviting him to what I claimed was a surprise gathering, I could hear the nervousness in his voice, though he tried to hide it. The week that followed felt like a performance, each of us playing roles we no longer believed in. My wife laughed, cooked, and kissed me goodnight, all while maintaining her secret world. I watched her carefully, not with love but with the calm focus of someone preparing for a storm. I knew the truth would soon surface, and when it did, there would be no turning back. The night of the gathering arrived, and our home filled with people who thought they were there to celebrate. Friends, neighbors, family members, all unaware they were about to witness the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. When the man walked through my door carrying flowers, the audacity of his presence nearly took my breath away. My wife's reaction, brief but unmistakable, confirmed everything. As the evening unfolded, tension grew, invisible yet powerful, until it could no longer be contained. I raised my glass and spoke of dedication and long hours, my words laced with meaning only a few understood. The room fell silent when I revealed the truth, and the faces around us shifted from joy to shock in an instant. My wife's confession, whispered through tears, ended the illusion she had built so carefully. After the guests left, taking my daughter with them to spare her from the aftermath, I confronted the man and laid out the evidence he could no longer deny. The fantasy he believed in crumbled as he realized he had been part of a lie far larger than himself. I handed him documents that marked the beginning of a new chapter, one neither of them had anticipated. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than ever, stripped of the false comfort that once filled its walls. My wife asked what would happen next, and I told her plainly. She would leave, and I would protect our child at all costs. The life we had built together was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain, yet undeniably real. In the weeks that followed, I focused on creating stability for my daughter, surrounding her with people who truly cared. The legal process moved forward, and though it was painful, it was also liberating. For the first time in months, I felt grounded, certain of my path. My daughter began to smile again, her laughter returning as our home transformed into a place of honesty rather than secrets. I learned that sometimes losing what you thought you had is the only way to discover what you truly deserve. The road ahead was long, but it was finally mine to walk. Time passed in a way that felt both slow and impossibly fast, as though every day carried the weight of a year, while somehow disappearing the moment I tried to hold on to it. The silence in our house was no longer the heavy, suffocating kind that followed betrayal, but something quieter, steadier, almost gentle, like a deep breath after surviving a storm. My daughter settled into a new rhythm with surprising resilience, doing her homework at the kitchen table while humming softly, as if she were slowly reclaiming pieces of joy that had been stolen from her without her knowing. I rearranged the furniture, repainted the walls, and boxed away reminders of a life that no longer existed, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because I needed to make space for something honest to grow. Every small change felt symbolic, as if I were rebuilding not just a home, but an identity that had been buried under years of compromise and quiet disappointment. Friends checked in, some awkwardly, others with genuine concern, and each conversation reminded me that I was not alone, even when the nights felt long and the future uncertain. I began to understand that healing was not a sudden moment of clarity, but a slow, uneven journey marked by setbacks, small victories, and a growing sense of self-respect I had never fully known before. As months slipped by, my daughter's laughter returned, brighter and more frequent, filling the rooms with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. She started inviting friends over again, leaving her toys scattered across the living room floor, and asking questions about the world with the kind of curiosity that only children possess. Watching her regain her sense of safety strengthened my resolve to protect her from ever being used or neglected again. I learned to cook meals she loved, even if they weren't perfect, and we created new traditions that belonged only to us, like Friday movie nights and Sunday morning pancakes. Each routine became a quiet declaration that our life, though changed, was still meaningful. I no longer felt like a man abandoned in his own story, but someone actively shaping a future that reflected his values. The pain had not vanished, but it no longer controlled me, and that alone felt like freedom. Eventually, I found the courage to open myself to new connections, not because I was searching for someone to fill a void, but because I had finally learned that I deserved companionship built on respect and truth. I met people who listened, who laughed easily, and who treated my daughter with kindness rather than indifference. One woman, gentle yet confident, became a regular presence in our lives, sharing dinners and stories, and slowly earning my daughter's trust through patience rather than grand gestures. I moved carefully, aware of how fragile hearts can be, especially after betrayal, but for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that did not revolve around fear of being hurt. It was not about replacing what I lost, but about building something new on a foundation of honesty. Meanwhile, my former wife faded into a distant chapter of our lives, her visits with our daughter structured and limited, her presence no longer a source of confusion or instability. She appeared changed, quieter, as if the consequences of her choices had finally reached her, but I no longer felt responsible for carrying her regrets. The past, once a constant ache, slowly transformed into a lesson that strengthened rather than weakened me. I realized that forgiveness did not mean forgetting, nor did it mean reopening old wounds, but rather releasing myself from the weight of resentment. My focus shifted entirely to the life I was creating, guided by the understanding that love should never require sacrificing one's dignity. There were moments when doubt crept in, when memories resurfaced and threatened to pull me backward, but each time I reminded myself of the truth I had uncovered and the strength it took to face it. Growth, I discovered, often begins in discomfort, in the willingness to confront realities we would rather avoid. Through therapy, long conversations with friends, and countless quiet nights of reflection, I began to trust my instincts again. I learned to recognize red flags, to honor my boundaries, and to speak openly about my needs. The version of myself that emerged from this journey was more grounded, more self-aware, and far less willing to settle for less than he deserved. My daughter, too, grew stronger, her sense of self shaped by the stability we built together. She learned that love is shown through actions, through consistency, and through listening, rather than through empty promises. Watching her thrive reminded me why I had chosen to confront the truth instead of hiding from it. Each time she smiled, each time she ran into my arms after school, I knew that choosing honesty had been the greatest gift I could give her. Our bond deepened, built on trust and mutual respect, and I felt proud of the example I was setting, even when the path had been difficult. The town, once filled with whispers and speculation, eventually moved on, as it always does, leaving us free to define ourselves without the weight of judgment. My business stabilized, and I found new purpose in helping others, understanding firsthand how fragile life can be. Every roadside call, every stranded driver, felt like a reminder that everyone carries unseen burdens, and that kindness, even in small moments, can make a profound difference. I approached my work with renewed gratitude, aware that each day was an opportunity to choose integrity over convenience. Looking back, I realized that the collapse of my marriage, though devastating, had forced me to confront truths I had ignored for years. It pushed me to value myself, to demand honesty, and to prioritize my daughter's well-being above all else. The life I now lived was not the one I had imagined when I first fell in love, but it was real, grounded, and built on principles that mattered. I no longer feared being alone, because I understood that solitude could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The home we shared transformed into a place of peace, free from secrets and deception. Each room reflected our journey, filled with memories of laughter, resilience, and growth. The walls no longer felt heavy, as if relieved to hold a story of truth instead of lies. I found joy in simplicity, in quiet mornings, and in the knowledge that I had chosen a path aligned with my values. The future, once clouded by uncertainty, now felt open and full of possibility. Through every challenge, I learned that betrayal does not define us, but how we respond to it does. The courage to walk away from what hurts, to rebuild from the ashes, and to protect those we love is what shapes our character. My story, once marked by heartbreak, became one of renewal, proving that even the deepest wounds can lead to unexpected strength. And so, as I watched my daughter grow and my life evolve, I embraced the truth that sometimes endings are simply beginnings in disguise. What I lost gave me the chance to find myself again, to create a home filled with honesty, compassion, and hope. It was not the life I had planned, but it was the life I chose, and in that choice, I discovered a freedom I never knew I needed.